And boy, I was a born-again Christian. I was a born-again Christian. So I get home and I go to my room, I'm changing my clothes, and I had a dirty magazine that I hid in my room. And I had a temptation to look at that magazine. And then finally on Sunday, when it was time for that, church, and we had that altar call, I walked back up again because I didn't think it worked the first time. That would be a horrible way to die. Come here. You're missing? What's wrong with his gill? Oh no! He got air coming out his lungs. He's already been punctured. Buddy! Let's get a little bit closer. Oh Lord, look. Hold on, y'all, look. Y'all see that? Do y'all see who else is watching that bullfrog? That's funny. No, don't do it. Oh. No. Oh my gosh, did y'all see that? All right, hold on. Uh-huh. All right, should I allow this to happen? Should I allow this to happen? All right, so let me recap what's happening here. I was coming out the driveway, headed over to Longhorn Lester's. And as I come out the gate, I saw this huge bullfrog right there in the driveway, which terrifies me. I opened the gate, I drove on through, I straddled the bullfrog. Now, I don't want to run over it. So I kind of straddled the bullfrog. And as I get past, I thought to myself, you know what? This might make a pretty cool video for people who've never seen a bullfrog that size. So I had every intention of videoing that bullfrog and showing you guys the size of these things. Of course, I know where he's headed. He's going towards the pond, which means I will never get in that water again. Seriously. But as I get out of my truck and start videoing, all of a sudden I spot something in the corner of my eye. Anyway, so I'm having this inner conflict. As I got out of my truck and I saw what was happening with the hawk, the bullfrog. On one hand, as much as I don't like frogs, I feel an inclination to save this one from a horrific death. I bet you that hawk had already picked him up and was going to take him off and have a nice dinner. And I don't know, but I'm guessing when I drove by, either it dropped it out of fear of my truck coming. Look, y'all, that's sad. He has a puncture right there and right over here. He may not live anyway. But that is sad to me. Hey, sweet things. Oh, well, anyway, my inner conflict was sitting there saying, oh, y'all, either A, I wanted to go ahead and give that hawk a nice meal. I mean, it is a bullfrog that I'm scared of and don't like. Or B, save the little frog. Save the little frog. And I chose to save the frog. I was talking to L.E. L.E. and I have these very deep conversations. And a lot of times I don't want to say they're religious based, because everyone knows I'm not a religious person. I'm a very spiritual person. I know you don't understand. If you're a religious person and you're set in your ways about your Southern Baptist or your Pentecostal or your whatever, Catholic, there's no talking to a lot of folks about things if they've already set in their ways and they're... But I'm not a religious person. I'm more of a spiritual person. And let me tell you something. I was telling Elise something about a story of when I was 13. And I had, we'd gone to church and the pastor had preached a sermon that had touched me. It had touched my heart. And so at the end of the service, the pastor asked, he did the I forgot what they actually called it in church, but the altar call, where he calls you up. If you want to give your life to Christ, then you come on up and he'll pray with you and you go through all of the steps of salvation. So sure enough, man, I knew I felt God touching my heart. So I got up and walked up, and me and that pastor, we sat there, and he hugged me and he whispered in my ear some things, and I repeated some steps and told him what was on my heart, and it was nice. And boy, I was a born again Christian. I was a born again Christian. And then we got in the car, came home. Mom and Dad, man, they were so proud of Lester. Man, Lester, you're a born again Christian, And all these folks who were after church were all shaking my hand and welcoming me to the family. So I get home and I go to my room, I'm changing my clothes, and I had a dirty magazine that I hid in my room. And I had a temptation to look at that magazine. And, back in those days, there was no phone, no cell phone. So you didn't have internet. You don't have access to all the different websites. So what we had were magazines. Duh, come on, guys, And so I had this temptation to look at my magazine. But, I'm like, wait a minute. I'm a born again Christian. Why do I want to look at that magazine? What am I doing? I can't look at that magazine. I'm a Christian. But I wanted to look at that magazine. And so that magazine, sitting there wherever I hid it, was just like, it was calling my name. And I remember that I went through the entire day trying to take my mind off that magazine. I knew I should probably get rid of it, but I couldn't make myself get rid of it. And at some point through the course of that week, I got back out my magazine and I enjoyed the pictures that were in it. And every single day, probably 5 times a day, to be honest, that I begin to want to look at my magazine, I kept feeling that feeling. Lester, I'm a Christian. I'm a born again Christian. What am I doing trying to look at this magazine? And so I kept having this battle, this man versus himself, this little conflict in my head. And it went on, y'all, all week long. And then finally on Sunday, when it was time for that, church, and we had that altar call, I walked back up again because I didn't think it worked the first time. I know, I did not think it had worked the first time. And so the pastor, his name was Brother Laws, L-A-W-S, Brother Laws. I still remember this. Brother Laws, and I'm sure the entire church, I know my family must have been like, what the hell is he doing? You don't get... And so Brother Laws come to pray with me. And I told him that I didn't get saved right the first time. And I wanted to be saved again. And he told me, he goes, he prayed with me. So he didn't want to embarrass me. And he prayed with me. And he didn't want to have this conversation in front of the church, obviously. So he sent me back to my pew. And he said he'll talk to my parents. He wants to meet with me after church. So later that day after church, Brother Laws comes over to the house. Now, this is the days whenever your pastor would visit you. And I'm sorry if you go to a church where your pastor doesn't visit you, but that's what I remember about Brother Laws. He came to the house and he wanted to talk to Lester. So Mom and Dad sent him back to my room, and we're sitting there, and I told him about the book, about my magazine, and about my temptation to look at it. Guys, I'm sorry you're staring at my face. I hate making videos where you stare at me. Let me walk around a little bit. So Brother Laws and I begin to talk about my temptation, about how the devil's getting into my head, and how I want to look at that book and I know it's wrong. And Brother Laws, man, he was very, very, I guess I can say professional. I mean, he was really good with what he did for a living. And he says, Lester, he goes, don't think that you're not, he said, he explained to me how I have it all wrong. Now, I'm going to try to paraphrase what Brother Laws told me. And guys, I may get it wrong. And do not ever evaluate your relationship with God based on something you hear from Lester. Please don't do that, because I do not want to be known as a guy who led you astray. But Brother Law said something to the effect of, that conflict inside my head, that battle that I'm having that's going back and forth, that is the voice of God. That is the way that God reasons with us. That's my conscience telling me. Look, y'all, that frog is still here. I think he's either died or about to die. Lord, I didn't save him at all. I probably just prolonged his death, dang it. Brother Laws explained to me that what's happening inside of my head or in my conscience is that the devil is trying to tempt me to do something that I shouldn't do, and the Spirit of God that lives inside of me is trying to remind me of the commitment that I made to follow Jesus and turn away from things that are evil and bad. And he said, you don't have to be saved again. He goes, that right there is proof enough that you're saved. He goes, now it's your job to do what you have to do. And you carry on. And he goes, you're going to spend a lifetime of temptations in different forms, different shapes. And he goes, and because you have the Spirit of God living inside of you, he's going to tell you, he's going to remind you, he's going to whisper to you in his own way what you should and should not do. And he said, but it's up to you to make those decisions. And that right there will determine if you truly have chosen to follow Jesus. And so I've never forgotten that. And even though here I am at the age of 50, and so that would be, man, don't even make me do the math how many years ago, I've also stopped going to church. Those who follow the page, you already know my reasons for that. But I've never stopped believing and remembering that message from Brother Laws. And I'll tell you what else I've never stopped doing, is having to constantly fight with those little inner battles, man versus himself, in my conscience, of what's right and what's wrong, and trying to make sure that I do the right thing. I am driving home from Longhorn Lester's. It's been a heck of a day, y'all. It's only 80 degrees, but I got a workout today. I was thinking about that story that Brother Laws, Pastor Laws, told me about the God and devil and this little constant tug of war that they do inside of your conscience and your soul. And then I guess it kind of reminds me of the little cartoon of the devil and the angel and how they whisper things in your ear. But I remember that Brother Laws told me something. And then I'll end this video. He says, hey, he goes, Lester, he goes, you're going to always have that fight. It's never going to go away. He goes, as long as you strive and you pray and you ask for God's help in making those right choices. He goes, and if you do slip, he says, ask forgiveness. He goes, don't be embarrassed to admit your flaws. And he goes, ask for forgiveness and move on and just try harder and work harder. And so it makes you feel happy to know that all these years later, even though I've stopped going to church, I still have the messages that was instilled inside of me long time ago. And it doesn't mean that the demons don't still sit there and come at you And they come at all of us. A lot of y'all are like, I don't have no demons, Lester. I don't have no demons. That does sound scary. But no, we are all haunted by our own demons. And they come in all shapes and sizes. But it's nice to know that when they come to mess with you, and they're sitting there telling you to do things you shouldn't be doing, you always have that other voice trying to remind you, Lester, WWJD. Where'd all this come from? Where did this whole video come from? Oh. A chicken hawk who was trying to eat a frog. Y'all have a great day. Y'all fight them demons, y'all. WWJD.